Over the years, Fromsoft have created a wide host of incredible boss fights, the Souls series probably having the best boss lineup of any franchise. As my favourite parts of these games, I wanted to rank the highest highs of these powerful foes and see which bosses truly stand out from the rest. I'll be following this video up with a ranking of the top 10 worst bosses in Soulsborne, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. That said, let's get straight into the ranking. My favourite boss from Elden Ring prior to the DLC, Maliketh, is the one I was most anticipating leading up to the game's release. The trailers showcased his awesome design, red flames and acrobatic moveset, which really intrigued me as to how the boss would play out. He did certainly not disappoint, as the final result is an incredible and intense fight with one of FromSoft's coolest adversaries. Seriously, "Oh death, become my blade once more" is one of the hardest quotes FromSoft have ever cooked. The fight begins with the Beast Clergyman, the weaker half of the fight, but still a very solid battle. The second phase really is its highlight, and if there was one change I could make to this fight, it would be to make phase 2 begin at 3/4 of Maliketh's health, rather than 50%. The way Maliketh interacts with the arena as it crumbles around him is such a great spectacle, which meshes with the black and red flames of destined death, which cut down your health permanently. Maliketh really is the embodiment of all that's great about Elden Ring's design philosophy, and reminds me heavily of the next boss on this list. Ludwig is one of two bosses I consider the perfect embodiment of FromSoft's boss design, with the other being higher up on this list. He has a design that tells his story perfectly, and the arena accentuates this so much. He has one of the best phase transition cutscenes in all of Souls, and the flow of the fight blends perfectly with the incredible soundtrack that showcases the lore and qualities of the boss through audio, a trademark of FromSoft's highest quality bosses. The Moonlight Greatsword is such a nice addition to his design, the teal glow distinguishing the fight from many of the dark bosses of Bloodborne. I personally prefer the second phase of the fight, being more in line with the honourable duels I'm so fond of. Ludwig is seen by so many Soulsborne fans as the peak of their boss design, and while I don't find his moveset as fun to engage with as the few bosses left on this list, he still takes a decisive position among my favourite video game bosses of all time. Rellana had the potential to be higher on this list if only she'd had a cutscene to make me care more. That's not to say I don't like her lore, I think it's pretty great, but if you don't discover it before the fight, the encounter loses a lot of weight because of it. Thankfully, Rellana is both mechanically and visually incredible. Her fight feels like a blend of Pontiff Sullivan and Lady Maria, with the fast pace and combo variety of Melania. She's one of the most challenging encounters in the series, and I absolutely love it. Her design is incredible. The flaming sword aesthetic may have been done to death by now, but there's no denying that when you see it, you're in for an awesome fight. Rellana really is one of the most mechanically enticing bosses FromSoft have made, and I really feel she gets the short end of the stick, thanks to the discourse surrounding Shadow of the Erdtree's difficulty. While I feel those criticisms are completely justified for Consort Radahn, who even in spite of my level 1 dagger-only no-summon run of Elden Ring, took me around 150 attempts to defeat, Rellana's difficulty feels entirely earned, balanced, and fair, and I think she's as close to perfect as any other boss, just not quite as much so as the fights that surpass her. We've arrived at the boss which solidified my love for the Soulsborne series and the genre as a whole. When I first played these games, I started with Bloodborne, where my playthrough was halted by Vicar Amelia and my ignorance to the game's upgrade systems. I got Dark Souls 3 at a similar time, so I decided to come back to Bloodborne and approach Dark Souls 3 instead. I had a similar problem when reaching the Abyss Watchers, though this time it was purely a skill issue. As such, I moved on to Dark Souls 1, got cursed in the depths, and stopped playing once again. It's fair to say that my initial experience with From's games was not wholly positive, as I just couldn't push through its difficulty. When I finally came back to Dark Souls 3, my first fight with Dancer opened my eyes to the quality of these games. She had a gripping design and cutscene that immediately captivated me. Her soundtrack wasn't all that noticeable initially, but understanding her lore and the flow of the fight on subsequent playthroughs, I really do consider it one of the most fitting FromSoft have ever made. All these qualities stand alongside a breathtaking fight that feels so different from the rest of the game due to Dancer's ethereal and eloquent flowing movements and the shifting of pace between phases. She is probably the Soulsborne boss I will always be the most connected to, and while part of that is personal bias, the majority of her appeal is simply in her remarkable level of quality. Messmer is the poster child for the best DLC in Souls, and FromSoft definitely chose the best boss to represent it. Messmer excels in all areas. Fantastic gameplay, compelling lore, gripping visual design, it all comes together to create Elden Ring's best boss fight. His opening cutscene is chilling and enthralling, as is the fight itself, with blinding speed that requires incredibly swift reactions and precise movements. Every move has flame after effects that punish sloppy dodging and keep the player on their toes for the entire encounter. His second phase is just as strong, the snakes having frenzied hitboxes, but none of the jank of the snakes from Bloodborne's Shadows of Yharnam. He is one of the hardest bosses in Souls, and it all feels incredibly fair and earned. Messmer is the high point of Shadow of the Erdtree, and definitely deserves to be among the best of the best in FromSoft's boss roster. Artorias has some of my favourite lore and build-up of any Souls boss. It's unsurprising given he had an entire DLC centred around him, but Artorias really does take it to another level. His design is incredible, the broken arm being a mark of From's environmental storytelling. While Dark Souls 1 is incredibly clunky, and not nearly as refined as newer Souls games, it's really hard to see that in this boss. Artorias has combat that feels more akin to that of DS3 than his own game, and it's just as highly perfected as the bosses from the third game in the trilogy. I consider every move he possesses to be extremely well balanced, challenging and fair, a balance the first Dark Souls sometimes struggles to meet. The only thing holding Artorias back from the top tier of this list is his dated design, with some hitboxes, movements and interactions showing the age of Dark Souls 1. For the time he was made, Artorias was an absolutely monumental achievement in boss design, likely my favourite released in any game at that point. Unfortunately, FromSoft are masters at learning from their past experiences and improving on them in later iterations, and while Artorias still holds up, he doesn't quite have the level of perfection claimed by the bosses in our highest tier. Although I do see a lot of praise for the Lothric twins, I've seen them rated in the highest highs of Soulsborne rankings only a handful of times. I hate how little acclaim they receive, as they truly are one of the single best bosses in any video game. I remember playing Dark Souls 3 and thinking surely no boss would top Dancer. Then I fought the princes, and then Gael, who, spoiler, will appear higher on this list, and I finally understood why people love these games so damn much. Lorien has got to be one of the coldest characters in any game, and the dynamic between him and Lothric, which meshes with the mechanics of the fight, is incredible. I love the teleporting mechanic, which really is the distinguishing factor that makes this boss so unique. It creates such a perfect flow to the encounter, and makes it much more demanding, yet so much more enjoyable. The panic that ensues when the second phase initiates with a storm of holy magic is emblematic of the true value of the Soulsborne formula. Every move this boss has is fair, challenging, spectacular and fun to engage with. If this fight counts as a gank, it's easily the best in the series. I feel like the Godskin duo tried to mimic Lothric's resurrection of his partner and fumbled horribly. While my issues with Artorias are incredibly minor, and calling them issues is a stretch, where Artorias has aspects of his fight I would change, Twin Princes are a boss I genuinely don't think I can improve on, as is the case with the rest of the fights on this list. In my opinion, Lady Maria is the height of Bloodborne. She truly perfected the fast-paced and aggressive combat of Bloodborne with her nimble moveset. I do wish she had more posture in the first phase so you couldn't stunlock her, but it isn't a detriment to my enjoyment of the fight. Maria's attacks are all nearly perfectly designed, and I'm a sucker for cool bosses with dual swords. Her usage of Bloodflame is one of the coolest aesthetics in Bloodborne, and on top of that, they're all mechanically engaging and create an incredible flow to her fight. As with all bosses in the top 10, her visual and environmental storytelling is unparalleled by anyone besides FromSoft, with her sins being hinted at throughout the preceding level and her desperation to hide them from you as she descends into the use of blood arts, highlighting her tragic yet haunting lore. This is anchored in the soundtrack, which was one of my favourites in a game with one of my favourite OSTs of all time. Lady Maria is an unbelievable step up from most of Bloodborne's bosses, and is completely deserving of her spot on this list. Sword Saint Isshin is the best boss in Sekiro, the best final boss in the series, and the second best boss in all of Soulsborne. Isshin is a nearly flawless encounter in terms of his combat, and his presentation isn't far off. The arena is incredible, reminiscent of Gehrman's, and gets even better with the lightning in Phase 3. This is one of the hardest bosses in the series, having 4 whole phases, with the 3 after Genichiro all being more challenging than anything in the game before them. Prior to Elden Ring, I would say Isshin is the hardest boss in Soulsborne. I do like the brief fight with Genichiro to kick off the battle, as it creates a nice circular structure that demonstrates the player's growth and skill throughout the game. I honestly have nothing bad to say about Isshin's moveset, it really is perfect. Sekiro makes a battle like this possible thanks to the greatest video game combat ever. My only minor issue with the fight is that the player can fall off the cliff to their death, and I never enjoy when gravity becomes the primary threat in these games. Blighttown, the Gutter, and the Depraved Chasm are all examples of gravity just sucking the fun out of an experience. Thankfully, in Isshin's encounter it is very avoidable, and leaves a barely noticeable stain on a pretty much perfect boss that's only topped by one other. In my eyes, Gael is the pinnacle of the Souls series, and I know I'm not alone. There are so many other videos ranking the best bosses in Souls, and the vast majority have Gael in the top 10, most with him occupying the top spot. It's easy to see why. He has all the elements of an incredible boss. His combat takes advantage of all the strengths of DS3 and evolves as the fight goes on, telling his story and his movements. His score has grown to be one of my favourites in the series over the years, and the visual design is impeccable. Phase 3 is definitely my favourite, his flaming red cloak contrasting with the furious blue lightning as you duel at the end of time after all else has fallen to rot. He has possibly my favourite cutscene in any of these games, and one of the best quotes in "Is this the blood of the dark soul?" Gael doesn't fall short in a single area. He's perfect in every aspect, and I take no shame in echoing the sentiment everyone else has shared that Slave Knight Gael is FromSoft's magnum opus. That concludes my ranking of FromSoft's greatest bosses, a list that's so full of incredible gameplay and storytelling. Obviously this list is purely subjective. There are very few aspects of gaming as a medium that can be attributed to objective quality, so feel free to disagree and leave your own subjective opinion in the comments below, as long as you keep it polite. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be making a list of the top 10 worst bosses in Souls to follow this, so please like and subscribe to support the continued production of rankings like these.